It was an unusually quiet spring afternoon in the suburbs of Atlanta. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, their pink petals drifting lazily across the manicured lawns of Oakwood Heights. Officer Richard Brooks sat in his patrol car, parked strategically beneath the shade of an old oak tree. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten as he watched the steady stream of vehicles passing by with an intensity that made his fellow officers uncomfortable. Brooks wasn't interested in the soccer moms in their minivans or the contractors in their dusty pickup trucks. His attention zeroed in on a black Range Rover Sport that rolled past his position. The vehicle was immaculate, its windows tinted just within legal limits, and its chrome accents catching the afternoon sun. Something about it, or more accurately, someone inside it, made Brooks straighten in his seat. Behind the wheel of the Range Rover, Special Agent Michael Carter was riding the high of a successful 3-month undercover operation. His team had just wrapped up a major case involving corporate fraud, and he was finally heading home to get some much-needed rest. The soft jazz playing through his car speakers and the thought of his comfortable bed waiting at home had put him in a peaceful state of mind. That peace was shattered by the sudden flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Carter checked his speedometer. He was going exactly the speed limit. His registration was current, his lights were all working. He checked them just that morning, and he hadn't made any traffic violations. Yet here he was, being pulled over. A familiar weight settled in his stomach, one he carried since his teenage years. In his patrol car, Brooks called in the stop with barely contained satisfaction. "Dispatch, I've got a possible suspicious vehicle. Late model Range Rover, tinted windows." He didn't bother to mention what made the vehicle suspicious. He didn't have to. It was a dance he performed countless times before. Carter watched in his side mirror as Brooks approached, noting how the officer's hand rested near his weapon, a detail that didn't escape his trained eye. As a veteran FBI agent with 15 years of experience, Carter had been on both sides of traffic stops. He knew exactly what to do. Hands visible on the steering wheel, movements slow and deliberate, voice calm and steady. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban street as other cars drove past, their drivers slowing down to peer at the scene unfolding before them. A kid on a bicycle stopped to watch from a safe distance, phone already out and recording, a sad reflection of how common such scenes had become. Brooks's footsteps were deliberately heavy as he approached, his boots scuffing against the asphalt in a show of authority. He stopped just behind the driver's door, using his height to full advantage as he looked down through the tinted window. There was a tense moment before Carter pressed the button to lower it, the soft whir of the electric motor cutting through the uncomfortable silence. The next few moments would spark a chain of events that neither man could have predicted. What should have been a routine traffic stop was about to expose deep-rooted prejudices and trigger changes that would ripple through the entire police department. But for now, it was just two men on a sunny afternoon, one with a badge believing he held all the power, and another knowing that assumption was about to backfire spectacularly. As Brooks tapped his flashlight against the car door, his face already set in a mask of unwarranted suspicion, he had no idea he was about to learn one of the most expensive lessons of his career, one that would cost him far more than just his badge, license, and registration. Officer Brooks's voice cut through the warm afternoon air, sharp and demanding. He barely glanced at Special Agent Carter's face, his flashlight beam sweeping across the luxury car's interior despite the bright daylight. Carter reached slowly for his wallet, keeping his movements deliberate and his other hand visible on the steering wheel. Years of experience, both personal and professional, had taught him the delicate dance of these moments. "Of course, officer," he replied, his voice steady and professional. The leather wallet felt heavy in his hands as he pulled out his driver's license. Brooks snatched it from his fingers before he could even fully extend his arm. The officer's eyes narrowed as he studied the license, then darted back to the Range Rover, his expression darkening with poorly concealed suspicion. "Step out of the vehicle," Brooks demanded, not even waiting for Carter to produce the registration. This is a pretty expensive car for. He let the sentence hang unfinished, but his meaning was crystal clear. Is there a problem, officer? Carter asked calmly, though his heart rate had picked up slightly. Not from fear. He'd faced down actual criminals in his career, but from a familiar frustration that never got easier to handle. I said, step out of the vehicle. Brooks's voice rose, his hand now resting more firmly on his weapon. And while you're at it, you can explain how someone like you affords a ride like this. Carter noticed two things simultaneously. Brooks's body camera was conspicuously dark, its usual recording light off, and a small crowd was gathering at a safe distance, phones raised. He took a deep breath, remembering his FBI training about de-escalation. Officer, I'm going to reach for something in my jacket pocket. It's my credentials. Don't reach for anything. Brooks barked, unholstering his weapon partially. Hands where I can see them and exit the vehicle. Now. The situation was spiraling, but Carter maintained his composure. He could feel the eyes of the onlookers, hear the murmurs of the growing crowd. A mother hurried her children across the street, away from the scene. An elderly man shook his head sadly from his porch, his morning paper forgotten in his lap. Officer Brooks, Carter read the nameplate clearly visible on the officer's chest. I'm going to comply with your orders, but I need you to understand that I'm a federal agent. He kept his voice level, professional, the same tone he used when training new agents about maintaining control in tense situations. Brooks let out a harsh laugh. Yeah, right. And I'm the president. Out of the car, hands up where I can see them. You really expect me to believe you're FBI? Slowly, Carter opened his door, following every protocol he ever learned about officer safety, even as his professional dignity screamed in protest. The asphalt was hot through his dress shoes, expensive Italian leather that suddenly felt like a target on his feet. Everything about him, from his tailored suit to his car, seemed to fuel Brooks's baseless suspicion. A young woman in the watching crowd whispered loudly to her companion, "This isn't right. Someone should do something." Her friend was already typing frantically on her phone, likely sharing the scene on social media. Brooks moved closer, his stance aggressive. Hands on the hood, feet back, spread 'em. The command was accompanied by a slight push, not enough to be clearly excessive, but more than necessary. Carter complied, the hot metal of his car hood seeping through his suit sleeves. As Brooks began an unnecessarily thorough pat-down, Carter caught his own reflection in the tinted windows. In it, he saw not just himself, a decorated FBI agent with countless successful operations under his belt, but every person who'd ever stood in this position, dignity under assault, power stripped away by prejudice. What Brooks didn't know was that this moment wasn't going to end the way he thought. In Carter's car, his phone was already lighting up with calls from his FBI supervisor. In less than 15 minutes, this officer's entire world was going to turn upside down, but right now, Carter had to play this smart. He had to stay calm, stay professional, and let Brooks dig his own grave with every unprofessional action and biased word. The cool metal of handcuffs clicked around Special Agent Carter's wrists, each snap echoing in the suburban quiet. Officer Brooks made them unnecessarily tight, a small power play that spoke volumes about his character. The growing crowd of onlookers had their phones raised high, capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. "You're making a serious mistake," Carter said quietly, keeping his voice steady despite the discomfort. "My credentials are in my inner jacket pocket. Just take a look at them." Brooks scoffed, roughly patting down Carter's suit jacket. "Oh yeah, and I suppose these credentials cost as much as that fancy car of yours." His hand found the leather wallet in Carter's pocket, but instead of checking it, he tossed it onto the hood of the Range Rover without even opening it. A passing mail carrier slowed his walk, letters clutched forgotten in his hands as he watched the scene unfold. Two teenagers on skateboards had stopped at the corner, their faces reflecting a mixture of anger and resignation that seemed too mature for their years. "I've seen all kinds of fake IDs," Brooks continued, his voice dripping with unwarranted suspicion. "Probably got this whole setup with drug money, right? The car, the suit, the fancy watch. You really expect me to believe you came by all this honestly?" Carter took a slow, deep breath. Through the years, he'd faced down drug lords, broken up trafficking rings, and cracked international fraud schemes. But this, being handcuffed beside his own car, his credentials ignored on the hood, this brought a different kind of challenge. "Officer," Carter spoke clearly, aware that every word was being recorded by the bystanders, "you're currently detaining a federal agent. That wallet you just threw contains my FBI badge and ID. This situation can still be resolved professionally if you just verify my credentials." Brooks laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Right. And I suppose next you'll tell me you're working on a big secret case." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that still carried to the nearby onlookers. "Listen, pal. I wasn't born yesterday. People like you don't get to drive cars like this unless something illegal is going on." Inside the Range Rover, Carter's phone continued to light up with incoming calls. His FBI supervisor would be wondering why he wasn't answering, especially after such a crucial operation. Protocol dictated that he check in immediately after leaving the scene. Soon, they would track his phone's location. A police cruiser turned onto the street, responding to Brooks's earlier call for backup. Carter felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this officer would be more reasonable. But Brooks was already moving to intercept his colleague, no doubt ready to paint his own version of events. From the growing crowd came murmurs of disapproval. An older gentleman in a business suit had joined the onlookers, his face creased with concern as he made a phone call of his own. A woman who'd been gardening nearby had abandoned her flowers to watch, shaking her head in visible disappointment. "You know what?" Brooks returned, looking smugly confident. "We're going to take a little ride down to the station. Maybe there we can figure out where this car really came from, and what other surprises you're hiding." Carter stood straight, his dignity intact despite the handcuffs. "Officer Brooks, I want to be very clear. You're about to transport a federal agent in custody. Before you make that mistake, I strongly suggest you check my credentials and call the number on my ID card." But Brooks wasn't listening. He was too caught up in his perceived victory, in the power he thought he held. He didn't notice the unmarked federal vehicles that had just turned onto the street, their tinted windows concealing the cavalry that was about to change everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the scene as justice approached. Not the twisted version Brooks thought he was serving, but real justice, about to teach a lesson in humility and consequences that would reshape an entire department. The screech of brakes cut through the afternoon air as 3 unmarked black SUVs pulled up to the scene. Officer Brooks, still smirking and ready to put Special Agent Carter in his patrol car, froze mid-step. The crowd of onlookers parted as men and women in suits emerged from the vehicles, their FBI badges gleaming in the sunlight. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the shift supervisor, had also just arrived in his patrol car, taking in the scene with growing concern. His 20 years of experience told him something was very wrong here. The professionally dressed man in handcuffs, the gathering crowd with their phones recording, and now federal agents approaching with purposeful strides. This was about to become a major situation. "Officer Brooks," the lieutenant called out sharply. "Report. What's going on here?" Before Brooks could respond, a tall woman in a crisp navy suit approached, her FBI credentials already extended. "I'm Assistant Director Reynolds. You currently have one of my top agents in custody, and I'd very much like to know why." The color drained from Brooks's face. He looked from the assistant director to Carter, then to the wallet still lying untouched on the hood of the Range Rover. The crowd had gone quiet, phone still recording, capturing the moment Justice arrived wearing a suit and carrying a federal badge. We had a suspicious vehicle," Brooks stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew under a hot sun. Lieutenant Rodriguez moved quickly, retrieving Carter's wallet from the hood. Opening it, his eyes widened at the FBI credentials inside. "Officer Brooks," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "did you even check his ID?" The assistant director's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I'd like those handcuffs removed from my agent. Immediately." Her tone left no room for argument. As Brooks fumbled with the handcuff keys, more phones appeared from the crowd. This wasn't just a traffic stop gone wrong anymore. This was a moment of accountability unfolding in real time, and everyone knew it. "Sir," Lieutenant Rodriguez addressed Carter as the handcuffs came off. "On behalf of the department, I want to express our deepest apologies." He shot a withering look at Brooks, who seemed to be shrinking into himself with each passing moment. Carter rubbed his wrists, maintaining his professional demeanor despite everything. "Lieutenant, I appreciate that. I'd like to speak with you about implementing some department-wide changes to prevent situations like this in the future." The assistant director was already on her phone, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "Get me the police commissioner." "Yes, right now." She turned to Brooks, who was trying to edge away from the scene. "Officer, don't go anywhere. We're going to have a very long discussion about this." The crowd started buzzing with whispered conversations. A teenager nudged his friend. "Did you get all that?" An elderly woman on her porch nodded in satisfaction, finally seeing the kind of accountability she'd been hoping for. Lieutenant Rodriguez was already pulling up Brooks's body camera footage on his tablet, or trying to. "Officer Brooks, why is your camera off?" "Department policy clearly states." Actually, one of the other FBI agents interrupted, holding up a small device. "We have audio and video of the entire incident. Standard procedure during active operations. Agent Carter's vehicle is equipped with multiple cameras." Brooks's face went from pale to ashen. Everything, his comments, his actions, his assumptions, had been recorded in high definition. The footage would soon make its way up the chain of command, and he knew his career was hanging by a thread. The assistant director turned to address the gathered crowd, her voice carrying naturally across the scene. "Thank you all for your concern and for documenting this incident. Your attention to civic duty helps ensure accountability." She paused, making eye contact with several onlookers still holding their phones. "Rest assured, this will be thoroughly investigated." As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the suburban street, it was clear to everyone present that they had witnessed more than just a traffic stop gone wrong. They had seen the moment when unchecked authority collided with justice, and justice won. The police station's conference room had never felt so small. Officer Brooks sat alone on one side of the long table, his usual confidence replaced by nervous fidgeting. Across from him, Lieutenant Rodriguez and the assistant director reviewed the footage from Agent Carter's vehicle cameras on a laptop, their expressions growing darker with each passing minute. "Would you care to explain this statement?" The assistant director paused the video, her finger tapping the screen where Brooks's earlier words hung in the air. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside the conference room, the station buzzed with unusual activity. Officers gathered in small groups, whispering about what they'd heard. A young rookie watched through the glass walls, learning a lesson about accountability that no police academy could teach. I was just doing my job," Brooks muttered, his uniform collar suddenly feeling too tight. The vehicle seemed suspicious. "Suspicious." Lieutenant Rodriguez interrupted, his voice sharp. "Agent Carter's vehicle was properly registered, had no violations, and was driving exactly at the speed limit." "What exactly was suspicious about it, Officer Brooks?" The silence that followed spoke volumes. On the laptop screen, the footage continued to play silently. Brooks's aggressive stance, his dismissive handling of federal credentials, every unprofessional action captured in perfect clarity. "Sir, I didn't know he was FBI. Brooks tried again, his voice smaller now. That's exactly the problem. The assistant director leaned forward. You didn't know anything about him, yet you made assumptions. Dangerous assumptions. She pulled out a thick folder. We've been reviewing your record, Officer Brooks. This isn't the first time, is it? The folder contained dozens of civilian complaints, traffic stop records, and incident reports. A pattern emerged from those pages, a pattern that could no longer be ignored or explained away. Down the hall, Agent Carter sat with the police commissioner in his office. Their discussion was different, focused not on punishment, but on change. We have an opportunity here, Carter explained, spreading out a proposal he quickly drafted, to turn this incident into something positive for the department and the community. The commissioner, a veteran of both law enforcement and its problems, nodded slowly. What you're suggesting, mandatory bias training, review of all traffic stop procedures, community oversight, it's not going to be easy. Change never is, Carter replied, thinking of all the times he'd faced similar prejudices, even with his badge. But it's necessary. Back in the conference room, Brooks's world continued to unravel. Internal affairs officers had arrived, armed with questions about other incidents, other stops, other complaints that had been buried or dismissed. The thin blue line he'd hidden behind for years was disappearing. Your body camera, the lieutenant held up the device, was deliberately turned off. That alone is a serious violation of department policy. He paused, letting the words sink in. But combined with everything else we've uncovered today. Outside the station, news vans had begun to gather. The story was spreading, not just about a racist cop and an FBI agent, but about accountability, about change, about what happens when unchecked power meets its match. The assistant director closed the laptop, her decision made. Officer Brooks, effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full investigation. She stood, gathering her materials. I suggest you contact your union representative. You're going to need one. Brooks slumped in his chair, the weight of his actions finally hitting home. Through the conference room windows, he could see other officers watching, their faces a mix of disappointment and resignation. His badge and gun already sat in evidence bags on the table, symbols of authority he'd misused one too many times. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the station windows, it was clear that this day marked more than just one officer's downfall. It was the beginning of a change that would ripple through the entire department, touching every badge, every patrol car, every interaction with the public. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. Word spread through the police department like wildfire. 3 days after the incident, the break room television played yet another news report about Officer Brooks's suspension. Officers gathered around, coffee cups in hand, watching their department become the center of national attention. Another video surfaced today. The news anchor announced, showing Officer Brooks in a similar incident from last year. The footage played, grainy but clear enough to show the same aggressive behavior, the same baseless assumptions, just a different victim. A rookie officer turned to his training supervisor. How did this go on for so long? He asked, genuinely confused. His supervisor, a 20-year veteran, just shook his head, unable to find the right words to explain years of looking the other way. In his office, the police commissioner faced a room full of reporters. Camera flashes lit up the wood-paneled walls as he made his announcement. Effective immediately, we're implementing a comprehensive review of all traffic stop procedures, he stated firmly. Additionally, every complaint filed in the last 5 years will be re-examined by an independent review board. The room erupted with questions, but the commissioner raised his hand for silence. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. This is about ensuring our department serves and protects everyone equally. Meanwhile, internal affairs investigators worked late into the night, poring over Brooks's records. Each file they opened revealed another troubling incident, another warning sign that had been ignored. One investigator pushed back from her desk, rubbing her tired eyes. "Look at these numbers," she said to her partner. "The racial disparity in his traffic stops is off the charts." At home, Brooks sat in his darkened living room, watching his own face on the news. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters, lawyers, even old friends suddenly wanting to distance themselves. His uniform hung in the closet, untouched since that day. The weight of his actions, built up over years of unchecked bias, finally pressed down on him like a physical thing. Back at the station, Agent Carter met with the department's training division. The room was packed with officers, some skeptical, others eager for change. "Look," Carter began, standing before them in his FBI suit, "what happened to me wasn't unique. It wasn't rare. But how we respond to it, that's what matters now." He clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showing statistics that made several officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "These numbers tell a story," he continued. "A story we can either learn from or ignore. The choice is yours." In the back of the room, Lieutenant Rodriguez watched his officers' reactions. He saw the moment some of them got it, really got it, as Carter shared his own experiences, not just as an FBI agent, but as a person who'd faced prejudice his whole life. The community response was overwhelming. The local community center hosted a town hall meeting that drew hundreds. People lined up to share their stories, similar traffic stops, similar assumptions, similar fear. But this time, someone in power was actually listening. "We're not here to point fingers," a community leader said, addressing the crowded room. "We're here to build bridges, to create understanding, to make real change." Several police officers in attendance nodded, beginning to see their role in the community through new eyes. As the sun set on another day of changes and challenges, Agent Carter stood in the police station parking lot, looking up at the building. His phone buzzed. Another interview request from a national news outlet. But he wasn't interested in fame or headlines. He was interested in change, real change, the kind that starts in one place and spreads like ripples in a pond. Inside the station, a new poster hung in the briefing room. "Protect and serve. Everyone. Every time." It wasn't just words anymore. It was a promise, backed by new policies, new training, and a new understanding of what it meant to wear the badge. The incident that started with one traffic stop was becoming something bigger, a catalyst for change that would affect not just one department, but could serve as a model for others across the country. 2 weeks into the investigation, the Internal Affairs Office looked like a war room. Papers covered every surface, computer screens displayed years of traffic stop data, and tired investigators worked through stacks of civilian complaints that had previously been swept under the rug. "You need to see this," called out one investigator, waving a file. Her colleagues gathered around her desk, where she compiled a spreadsheet of Brooks's traffic stops over the past 3 years. "Look at these patterns." It wasn't random at all. The numbers told a damning story. Over 80% of the vehicles Brooks pulled over belonged to minority drivers. Most stops had flimsy justifications like suspicious behavior or routine check. Even more troubling were the complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from the system. Down the hall, the police commissioner sat with the city's legal team, their faces grim as they reviewed the mounting evidence. "This goes beyond one officer," the lead attorney said, pushing her glasses up. "These complaints were actively buried. Someone higher up had to be involved." The investigation was spreading like roots through the department, uncovering years of institutional problems. Officers who had worked with Brooks found themselves under scrutiny, especially those who had witnessed his behavior and said nothing. At the local coffee shop across from the station, 2 veteran officers sat discussing the changes over their morning coffee. "Remember when he stopped that doctor last year?" One asked quietly. "We knew it was wrong, but..." He left the sentence hanging, shame evident in his voice. His partner nodded slowly, stirring his coffee. "We all told ourselves it wasn't our problem. Guess what? It was always our problem." The city council called an emergency session to address the growing crisis. The chamber was packed with citizens, reporters, and police officers. Agent Carter sat in the front row, watching as council members propose sweeping reforms. It's not enough to just fire one officer, a council member argued passionately. We need to change the whole system that allowed this to happen. The crowd murmured in agreement, phones recording every word. In the evidence room, technicians worked through Brooks's body camera footage from the past year. Most videos showed normal police work, but every so often, they'd find one where the camera mysteriously turned off just before a traffic stop. Each instance was carefully documented, building an undeniable pattern of behavior. The local newspaper ran a powerful series titled Traffic Stops, a Pattern of Prejudice. They interviewed dozens of citizens who had encountered Brooks over the years. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, showing how one officer's unchecked bias had affected countless lives. At a local high school, students organized a forum about police interactions. Officers from the department attended, not to defend themselves, but to listen. One student shared how his father had taught him exactly what to do when pulled over, hands visible. No sudden movements, yes sir, no sir, lessons no child should have to learn. The department's training officer reviewed years of Brooks's performance evaluations. Look at these glowing reviews, she said to the internal affairs chief. Either his supervisors were completely blind, or they were part of the problem, the chief finished grimly. Outside the station, community activists had set up a tent where people could safely share their experiences with law enforcement. The stories poured in, not just about Brooks, but about a system that had allowed his behavior to continue for so long. As evening fell, Agent Carter met with the police commissioner again. On the commissioner's desk lay a thick report detailing recommended changes. Body cameras that couldn't be turned off during stops, civilian review boards with real power, mandatory bias training with measurable outcomes. This isn't just about punishing one officer anymore, the commissioner said, looking out his window at the city lights. This is about making sure it never happens again, to anyone. The investigation had become a mirror, forcing the entire department to take a hard look at itself. And what they saw wasn't pretty, but acknowledging the problem was the first step toward real change. 1 month after the incident, the police department's main training room buzzed with activity. Officers filled every seat, their attention focused on the front where Agent Carter stood beside a community leader. This wasn't just another mandatory training session. This was the beginning of real change. Today, we're not here to point fingers, the community leader began, her voice carrying authority earned through years of advocacy. We're here to learn from each other, to understand each other, and to do better. The new training program had been developed with input from community members, civil rights experts, and officers themselves. On the screen, body camera footage played, not just from Brooks's incidents, but from departments across the country. Each clip sparked discussion, challenged assumptions, and opened eyes. Let's break this down, Agent Carter said, pausing a video. What could have been done differently here? The room, initially quiet, gradually filled with suggestions. Officers who'd been on the force for decades found themselves learning from rookies who brought fresh perspectives. In the police station's lobby, workers installed a new electronic display board. It showed real-time statistics of traffic stops, broken down by demographic data, complete transparency, available to anyone who walked in. The old way of doing things, hidden behind closed doors and buried paperwork, was over. Lieutenant Rodriguez walked through the parking lot, inspecting the newly installed cameras on every patrol car. These weren't just dash cams anymore. They were part of a comprehensive recording system that couldn't be turned off during stops. It protects everyone, he explained to a curious rookie, the public and the officers. At City Hall, the police commissioner presented the department's new policies to the city council. Every traffic stop will now require clear probable cause, he explained. Officers must call in their reason for the stop before activating lights. No exceptions. The council members listened intently as he outlined other changes. Regular review of stop data by civilian oversight boards, mandatory partner rotation to prevent problematic partnerships, and a new anonymous reporting system for officers to flag concerning behavior among their colleagues. Back at the station, officers gathered in small groups during their break, discussing the changes. "You know what?" said one veteran officer, surprising his younger colleagues. "In 20 years on the force, this is the first time I feel like we're really serving everyone equally." The department's website underwent a complete overhaul. A new section allowed citizens to easily file complaints or commendations, track their status, and see resolution outcomes. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword anymore, it was department policy. Community meetings, once sparsely attended formalities, now drew crowds. Officers and citizens sat together, not as opposing forces, but as partners in public safety. They shared meals, stories, and ideas for building trust. In the dispatch center, new protocols took effect. Every traffic stop was logged with precise details: reason for stop, driver demographics, duration, and outcome. Pattern recognition software analyzed the data in real time, flagging any concerning trends for immediate review. The department's social media accounts shared regular updates on the reform progress. One post showed officers attending cultural awareness workshops led by community members. Another highlighted the success of a new mentorship program pairing officers with local youth. "This isn't just about preventing another incident," Agent Carter explained to a reporter doing a follow-up story. "It's about creating a model that other departments can follow." Real change happens when good policies meet willing hearts. As the sun set on another day of training, an older officer stopped Agent Carter in the parking lot. "You know," he said quietly, "I've got 5 years left until retirement. For the first time, I feel proud of the legacy I'll leave behind." The reforms weren't just words on paper or promises made in the heat of scandal. They were living, breathing changes that touched every aspect of police work. The department was becoming what it should have been all along: a true partner in community safety, treating every citizen with the dignity and respect they deserved. 6 months after that fateful traffic stop, the police department's largest conference room was packed for a special hearing. Officer Brooks sat at one end of the long table, his police uniform replaced by a plain suit, his attorney beside him. The evidence against him had become overwhelming. Based on the comprehensive investigation, the review board chairperson announced, and the overwhelming evidence of systematic bias in your conduct, this board recommends immediate termination and revocation of your law enforcement certification. Brooks stared at the table, his face ashen. All his excuses, all his justifications had crumbled under the weight of evidence. Years of dashboard camera footage, civilian complaints, and his own body camera videos painted a clear picture that couldn't be explained away. In the back of the room, Agent Carter watched quietly. He wasn't there to gloat or celebrate. For him, this moment represented something bigger than one officer's downfall. It was proof that change was possible, that accountability wasn't just an empty word. Outside the station, local news crews interviewed community members about the changes they'd seen. An elderly gentleman who'd lived in the neighborhood for 40 years spoke with tears in his eyes. "For the first time," he said, "I'm not afraid when my grandchildren drive to visit me." The department's new training center buzzed with activity. Officers from neighboring cities had started coming to observe the reformed procedures. The program that had emerged from the incident was becoming a model for departments across the state. "See how the traffic stop numbers have changed." Lieutenant Rodriguez pointed to a display in the station lobby. The screen showed clear statistics. Stops were down, but successful arrests for actual crimes were up. This is what happens when we focus on real probable cause instead of assumptions. In a classroom at the police academy, new recruits watched footage from Brooks's final traffic stop, the one with Agent Carter. But now it wasn't just about what went wrong. It was a lesson in how to do things right, how to serve with dignity and respect. The police commissioner stood at a podium during a national law enforcement conference. 6 months ago, our department faced a crisis, he began. Today, we're here to share how that crisis became an opportunity for real change. In the evidence room, Brooks's badge and gun lay in a sealed box, tagged and filed away. Artifacts of a darker time. The officer cataloging old cases paused, remembering how things used to be. Hard to believe we ever worked that way, she said to her partner. At a community center basketball game, officers played against local teenagers, their patrol cars parked outside with new logos. Guardians of Community Trust. The kids no longer scattered when police drove by. Instead, they waved, knowing these officers as neighbors and protectors. Agent Carter sat in his FBI office, reviewing emails from police departments across the country asking about the reform program. His traffic stop had become more than just an incident. It had sparked a movement. The final report on Brooks's case became required reading at police academies statewide. Not just as a cautionary tale, but as a blueprint for change. His story taught future officers that a badge was not a shield from accountability, but a symbol of public trust. As the sun set on another day, a young officer pulled over a speeding car. She followed the new protocols perfectly. Camera on, clear probable cause, respectful interaction. The driver, initially tense, relaxed as he realized this wasn't the kind of stop he'd feared. In the end, it wasn't just about one bad officer or one wrongful stop. It was about a system that learned to look at itself honestly, to change meaningfully, and to serve truly. The incident that began with prejudice and power misuse had transformed into something powerful. A lesson in justice, accountability, and the ongoing work of earning community trust. Justice had been served not just through punishment, but through lasting change. And somewhere in the city, another traffic stop was happening. This time, the right way.